Hello guys and welcome back on the channel. I'm pretty sure you're gonna enjoy today's lesson so much. Whoever is interested to play against boring English in an attacking fashion and spirit, this is the right lecture for you. I didn't start this lesson with the position that you're having on the board just like that. I just want to explain you and tell you and to actually announce what can you expect from this lesson and how many crazy sacrifices and positions you're about to see. You're just going to enjoy this one. You just have to be a good attacker if you want to play like this. You also need to be ready to be very creative. In many of these positions, you are not supposed to rely on engine simply assessments. Many of these positions, you're just going to be worse according to the engines, but just couple moves like that. You can just turn the game upside down, or simply, sometimes what is good for the engine, it's not good for your opponent because he's a boring English player, right? And we just have to attack them. So let's go. If you want to find another interesting system against the English, you can go and find it. It's called Serbian system against the English. You can find it here on the channel, but this is something else. This is how to break, kill, and smash the English opening in the King's Indian fashion. Let's go. So we just have to begin with c4, knight f6, knight c3, and g6. You're a King's Indian player. You want to develop your bishop on g7. You want to attack. And you also always want to give them an option to go into the always favorable King's Indian. So they don't want to play that. They go with g3, bishop g7, bishop g2. And keep in mind that they don't even want to play d4, playing the fianchetto King's Indian, because they just want to play the English opening. And I just have to tell you and to reveal a secret to you. If there is a system that I hate so much to play against, or a system that I used to play, was the following one. I won some games here and there, but I also had lots of problems. One of my most recent games was like in the last year against Grandmaster Bogosavljevic. I badly got outplayed and I lost that game in Serbian finals. I also, after that, played 2 more games and won both, but I was lucky in both, against woman GM Sandra Djukic and a couple more. I won most of these faster time controls games, but more because I was just a better player and I was tricky than I was satisfied with the positions. And then I spent so much time analyzing these positions, trying to get like a good and proper feeling on this. And finally, I just have to tell you that I get back to you and I'm absolutely ready to show you something that you're gonna like so much. So let's go. After like d6, keep in mind, if they go with d4, you either play the King's Indian fianchetto with knight bd7 and d5, or you can go and play knight c6, followed by zillions of other systems that you can go with. Anyways, after castles, knight c6. For example, when you play knight c6, you gotta be ready to play King's Indian fianchetto with d4. And maybe in the future, or maybe even in the near future, I can give you an interesting plan here with the black pieces after knight c6, but I won't talk about this right now. They go rook b1. By now we just know, and we've just learned that these guys who play the English opening, they don't want to play the d4. So rook b1 to go with a typical close Sicilian plan by black. So they just play the close Sicilian reversed, and they just want to play on the king side. Sorry, queen side. And they want to play rook b1 followed by b4 and b5. You always should go with a5. Simply that a5 stops b4 for the time being, and when they play a3, you just go e5, no more d4 options, and there we go. This is a very important first position that I have to explain you. For example, take a look at this one. They now can go with d3, which is absolutely the main move, or lots of guys, they just think, okay, it's pretty much the same, let's just go with b4 straightforward. Well, those who do it, they've just made a mistake. You take, And now, believe it or not, just because the pawn is not placed on d3, you have early e4. Few days ago, I played a blitz game and killed my opponent by playing e4. I insist, this is a big move, this is a big improvement over the line when in ninth move they just go with b4 without having d3. So after e4, my opponent played the most logical move, knight g5. Looks like, by the way, I played against an IM. Look at this one. Looks like I'm about to lose this pawn. But I analyzed this. I was familiar with the following trick. And I was like very proud, like, let me just come up with my own analysis. I played knight h5. I don't think there are no games like knight h5, but I remember when I analyzed this like a few years ago, I was very happy when I found something like this. And take a look at this one. 3 times he's attacking the pawn on e4, but they can't take the pawn. So I am just threatening to take the knight. If they take bishop e4, I'm gonna take the knight. If they take knight g on e4, I'm gonna win the knight because there is no way to go. And finally, if they play knight c on e4, say goodbye to one of your knights, either the one on e4 or the one on g5. And basically, when you come up with knight h5, first of all, it's a great surprising factor for your opponent. And second thing, now he just has to find the proper way to defend. And believe it or not, this is probably the most difficult part of this one. They now have to play a whole bunch of only moves in order to get not decent, but let's just say defendable type of position that is definitely worse for them. First of all, they gotta find b5, attacking the knight on c6. And when you play knight f5, you're still threatening knight on g5 and pawn on c4. Now, once again, they can't touch and they can't take this pawn anyhow. So that's simply the point, because you have that f5 trick or simply win the knight on g5. And they gotta play d4. They cannot play d3 to defend the knight on g5 because knight on c3 would be hanging. And they gotta go with d4. And when they play d4, bishop defends the knight on g5. And that's a good thing. But you know what? Okay, now they want to win the central pawn, and we won't give it up. And we just go with f5. Once again, we're threatening at some point, not immediately, this one. I'd like to go with h6, kicking that knight away from g5, and maybe g5, restricting the knight, and, for example, knight e5. I only found one game, and that was a game played like 10 years ago in correspondence chess. The guy went for knight e5, which means that's one of the best engine moves. h6, kicking the knight away. And look at this one. I mean, you can play knight h3. Simply, you can even lock this one with the g5, and this knight is absolutely out of the game and feels absolutely misplaced. After knight e4, which was, I'd say, chaotic way of solving the problems, you just take on e4, b6, c5, knight c7, rook b8, bishop e4. They have 2 pawns for the piece. Knight f6, they have 3 pawns for the piece. But now black just repositioned his pieces, fully consolidated himself, and here black was almost winning and eventually won the game. Very interesting one, you have to admit, and it's one of my favorite. That's why everyone has to go with the d3 before that. Then you just go with another important moment for the whole variation. And conceptually, you just have to remember the following one. You cannot even imagine how many different type of moves and possibilities and positions can arise after the next move by black. And that's why we just have to be very careful here, and you just have to pay attention on the following thing. Keep in mind, now they just play d3, and in some of these moments, they'd like to go with bishop g5. They're avoiding e4, and it's important to react with one of the following moves for black. For example, one of my favorite moves here is h6, and I'm going to teach you that one. Why? We're attacking, we're getting ready for bishop e6, queen d7, which is going to give us potentially bishop h3, better idea. We're avoiding any bishop g5, bishop g5 followed by bishop f6, knight d5, knight d2, and control of the diagonal h1, a8, and also without possibility to take these e4 and d5 squares. And also h6 sometimes doesn't give them knight g5. Once we go with the battery, bishop e6, queen d7, bishop h3, they won't be able to harass that bishop on h3 with the knight g5 at any point. I'd like to emphasize the importance of this moment. I'm teaching you to play h6, telling you to go with h6 to avoid bishop g5 primarily, because Petrosian, when he was like younger and when he was in top of his shape, he used to play that bishop g5, swap off that bishop for the knight, have an easy game by jumping the knight on d5, playing afterwards b4 followed by b5, and somehow I can say that according to the engines, white should be better, but in practical play, white has an easier game. That's why I, once again, warning you, you gotta play h6 if you want to go with the plan that I'm about to teach you. You have so many moves. You have an idea with rook e8. You have an idea with bishop f5. You have an idea of knight d4. There are so many other options. But here, I'm just telling you, go with h6 if you want to attack. After b4, a takes, I once again have to explain you, we always want to go with a5 and a takes b4 because for the time being, a file is ours. It's not gonna be the case afterwards. Actually, they're going to be the ones who are just going to expand on the a file, and we just have to deal with that. So here, after a takes b4, I'd like to once again tell you, of course, I'm gonna teach you bishop e6 followed by queen d7 and bishop h3. But apart from that, if you ever look for something interesting, I can suggest you the plan with knight h7. Here, you gotta be, I would say, a millionaire of ideas and plans for black. So certainly an interesting idea could be knight h7. If you ever wondered what the point of this one is, apart from having f5, apart from having a g5, an idea could be at some point knight g5 and sometimes even h5, h4. That depends on their reactions as well. If they move the knight from f3, you go h5 and h4. If they don't move the knight, but for example play b5, knight e7, bishop e2, then you have following two plans. You go with g5, and then once again, lots of guys might think that we want to go knight g6. Of course we want to go with knight g6, but that's not our top priority. You can go with g4 and afterwards go with the knight g5 and go knight h3. Very interesting idea with the knight on h7. Another plan, you can go with bishop e6, and let's say, for example, they go like knight d2, opening up this bishop, threatening on b7. You go c6, queen d7, for example, connecting like this, and there we go. I can go with h4 here, place my dark square bishop on h6, getting some sort of tempo, and afterwards I can choose bishop h3, f5, f4, knight g5, knight h3. Once again, I'm telling you, I'm giving you ideas. I'm showing you different kinds of plans. You gotta be creative. You gotta be the ones who are gonna come up with all those things. Here, I just want to teach you to play bishop e6. It's very simple. My initial here idea is to go with the queen d7 and play bishop to h3. There are so many moves and so many possibilities. I'd like to show you e4. For example, e4 can be very annoying if you don't know how to treat. First of all, it weakens the bishop on g2 for the time being. It gives them great control of the d5 outpost and gives a very weird type of the pawn structure here. And here you can't go with the queen d7 and bishop h3 anymore. Please don't forget about that. When they play e4, they're happy to have the light square bishop traded off. No, we're not happy. We won't let that happen. And we're not going to play the way they expect. So what are we going to do? We're just going to play bishop g4. Once again, they dream that you're stupid enough and play the battery. I insist, they've played e4 They played e4, and now we're not supposed to go with the bishop h3 because this bishop is anyway stupid. So don't exchange it off. So after like queen d7, let's say they go with, I don't know, b5, you go with knight e7. Let's say they go with bishop e2. By the way, this is the best place for the bishop because they want to go, and this is one of those moments where I told you now they're going to benefit from open file. You go with bishop h3. You're so happy because you saw some coach somewhere told you, create a battery, bishop e6, queen d7, but he didn't explain you that here it would be extremely stupid. It would be complete misunderstanding of the position. And right after that, after rook a1, you just exchange and you say, well, I heard somewhere that I've got something. Well, you've got nothing. You don't have to worry about that. Because, for example, let's say you play knight h5, the most logical thing, you want to go like this. And they just go knight d2. And you play f5 and you say, oh my goodness, take a look at this one. I'm having almost mate. Nobody. You've got nothing. I'm just defending everything. I'm controlling d5. I'm going to jump at some point. And now it's my turn to kill you. I play queen b3. I can easily exchange everything. And I'm just going to have fun with you on the queen side. While on the king side, you absolutely have nothing. Even Dvoretsky talked about these positions in his book, I don't know, Mastering Middle Games or something like that. So that's what you need to do because definitely you're not supposed to play queen d7 when they play e4. And how are you supposed to play? Well, when they play e4, they just weaken the d4 square. They've just weakened the light square bishop. So we won't exchange it and we'll play bishop g4. That's an important thing. Now, I give up on my primer idea, like to go with the battery, to go with the bishop h3, and go after the d4 square. That's what I explain to my students. Not always you can apply something that your coach is, like taught you, because sometimes it works, and probably your coach explained it to you, but in some other circumstances on positions. So, and then you always use like an old good expression, my coach told me to do that. He told you to do that, but in a different kind of position. And don't accuse your coach of something that is actually your fault because you misunderstood it. So after bishop g4, they just go with h3. Very logical thing, like, let me win the bishop pair. Yes, you win the bishop pair. But actually, I played it on purpose. I want to get the d4 square control. In case of knight e2, which avoids knight e4 by black, we just go queen d7 to avoid h3. But I'm going to keep it there. But I actually did it for something else. I'm releasing the d8 square. So, for example, you play bishop e3 to avoid knight e4 at all costs. And I go knight d8. Look at this move. Beautiful one. I want to reposition my knight to a better e6 square. I want to get flexibility with c6. I'm even willing to go with my king on h7 just to make sure that there are no checks after he plays some queen b3. And then I'm going to go with possibly some attack because that bishop on e3 doesn't look that good, and my knight on e6 can join, for example, the attack on the king side. After h3, you just go bishop f3, queen f3, knight d4, queen d1. Here, I have a specialty for you. Here I got a specialty for you. No one ever played it. It's a very nice one. Looks like they have the bishop pair, but looks like we get a pretty good control of the dark squares. And now I'm talking about the good control of the dark squares, and I'm suggesting you to play h5. What the hell? Like, how can this guy say to play h5? Take a look at the g5 square. Isn't it terrible? Well, it looks like, but it's not. Imagine they play bishop g5. You bring the knight back, baby, to e6 and go after the bishop on g5, so it doesn't work. Well, can I play bishop e3 and just keep on developing? No, you cannot, because I'm going to play h4, and when you play g4, bring the knight back to e6, play knight h7, bishop f6, bishop g5, play knight h7, knight h to g5. Well, I am the one who's having full control of the weak f4 and g5 squares. And just like you see, Every single position, every single move requires strategically different and conceptually different, play by black. That's what you have to understand. Not like he said play h6, bishop e6, queen d7, and you always go with that. I mean, get serious. So after like h5, in my opinion, very human reaction could be h4. I'm avoiding h4. I can give my light square bishop finally maybe open diagonal, and looks good. Well, that's why we play queen d7. We're avoiding any bishop h3, and we're just going with some sort of like normal positions. After bishop e2, play c6 because take full control of the d5 center square, knight e2, and don't exchange it. Exchanges can help the bishop pair to get a little bit more space. Knight e6 works very successfully here. And after, for example, bishop h3, because they found a way to do something with the bishop, you just move the queen to a safety. And for example, I very much like the queen b3, logical, typical English type of move. You go knight g4. And now you're just picking either g5 or f5 and have an interesting idea on the king's side and potential attack. That's how you play if they go with e4. Instead of e4, for example, knight d2. Knight d2 happened in that game of mine against Bogosavljevic, and because he still wants to go with b5, in which case you don't have knight e7 because b7 is going to be hanging. And here against Bogosavljevic, I instantly played d5 because I feel a little bit bad about this bishop, and I need not to restrict its activity, but I simply have to give myself possibility on b5 to go back to e7. Bishop e2, I played c6, rook a1, and here, for example, I went with the idea of queen c7, but I believe knight f5 just works better. I want to place both of these rooks to b8. By the way, you'll see, I'm going to say that during the lecture, that when the queen stands on b3, your rook on b8 is just doing a great job against the queen on b3. Also, rook on e8 should be very supportive for the pawn on e5 and for some breaks with e4. If you, I don't know, just still wanna, you took my idea with h6, bishop e6 and queen d7 for granted, and you still wanna go with that, it's not the end of the world, or you simply make, I don't know, pre-move, or you simply forget about it, and all of a sudden when you play queen d7 they play b5. It's not the end of the world, but there is something extremely important to remember here. Your knight has to go to d8, and we definitely have to make the difference between the knight on d8 and knight that usually stands on e7. That knight on e7 after g5 can go on g6. That knight on e7 can go on f5. It controls the d5. Usually in those moments, you can go for c6 and d5. You can join the attack. But here the knight on d8, what to do with it? First of all, it came there to defend the pawn on b7. And now they all play knight d5. I checked all the games, and believe it or not, I couldn't find a single game with a proper reaction in the database of 10 million games. I couldn't find a single game where black played the best move here. And this is like very important for not only, beginners and medium level players, even for a player, players like of my strength, even way better than me. I found a couple of GMs here captured knight takes d5. That's mistake. That's strategical mistake. And to be honest with you, if I played a blitz game like this, I would probably also take on d5 and play bishop h3. Haven't I told you? When the diagonal h1, a8 is closed, they're happy to trade the light square bishops off. So when we took on d5, closed that, but at the same time opened c-file and created weakness on c7, they're happy to go with exchanging the light square bishops, and now they go with the queen c2 and go after the weak pawn on c7. Now, I don't have a good way of defending this one. Probably have to play rook c8 or queen d7. Where's my attack? With how many pieces I'm gonna be able to attack white. My knight is on d8. I gotta take care of the c7 weakness. I'm not sure even if f5 and f4 is going to bring me anything. And that knight on d2 can go on e4 and can go on f3. All things considered, we don't have an attacking potential in this type of the game. And believe it or not, after knight d5, you have to play bishop d5 move. I know that it looks crazy. I know that once again you would say, what the hell is this guy talking about? But after bishop d5, c takes d5, now they're left temporarily with a little bit closed bishop because the pawn is here and they hit a wall. And at the same time, we now go with the b6 move. What's so special about these b6 move? Well, the specialty about b6 is that we now go with the knight on b7. It goes on a5 or on c5 depending on their plan. And then I can even move the knight from f6 and launch some sort of like pawn storm on the king side. Who would say that bringing the knight on b7 and c5, that giving up the bishop pair can give you better chances than the previous one where you take on d5 and swap off the light square bishops? I know it doesn't sound that easy to understand, but this is why you gotta actually watch this type of the lesson a couple of times, and also you gotta take a look at all these type of English games many times in order to understand what's happening here. Finally, let's go for the main line, and here I'm just going to show you like a couple of games. I showed you all these side lines. So after b5 you go knight e7, and for some reason I believe that most of your opponents will play bishop e2 here. Briefly, let's go with h3 for d4 knight e2 and queen b3 moves here. If they go with h3, for a long time it was considered that h3 followed by king h2 can be a successful way of fighting these positions. I'm gonna give you two alternatives. I'm gonna give you positional one, bringing the knight back to d7, so you can do what? So you can play c6, so you can bring your queen to c7, so you can play and break in the center with d5. That's positional plan. Also, there is a plan with f5 at some point, even like this. And I'm gonna give you a typical attacking plan with the queen d7. You create a battery, you threaten the pawn, and it was considered that position like this is slightly better for white for all these years. Although there is a great move here for black with a little bit, I'd say, unstable and exposed king on h2, we can absolutely take advantage of that by playing great move g5. What's so good about g5? You threaten g4, you're opening up g6 square for the knight so it can go there, and then you just want to go after the, I'd say, misplaced king on h2. So let's say they want to go and they want to defend the g4 and they go e4, they get an outpost d5, they want to jump with the knight at some point, then first flexibility and then go with the king side attack with the knight g6 and g4. Apart from h3, there is a plan with e4. e4, there was a guy in my country who used to play like this, but it's nothing that special. After c6, once again flexibility before anything else. h3, now you're not going for queen d7, makes no sense to play it here, but even here you can go queen d7, king h2, g5 ideas, the ones that I showed you, like queen d7, you're coming up with the battery, threatening here, king h2, you go g5, and you want to go with the knight g6. Absolutely, I would say, a legit plan by black. Another thing, my student played once knight d7 and went with some f5, followed by g5, knight g6, bringing the knight back here and going for the typical King's Indian setup. But before that, you just have to defend here on c6. So when they take on f5, c6 is not going to be hanging. And finally, queen c7, a very lovely plan of defending the pawn on e5 and breaking in the center with d5. Bishop e3, knight d7, bringing the knight back. King h7, because they went for the battery went after the weak pawn on h6. King h7, breaking with f5, and you just have more or less normal type of the game. I always suggest you to, after e takes, to recapture by pawn, any f4, because they gotta stop even the pawn sack like this, we just go with the knight g6, and you know we always keep that flexibility, very characteristic for the King's Indian. Then instead of e4, they can go with d4. d4 is absolutely not English type of move. There is a guy from Poland, GM, who constantly plays this d4, Siborowski, and I just learned, because I played against him a couple of times, that we should take on c4, and when they take, we should play knight f to d5. Knight f to d5 goes after the knight on c3, opens up the bishop on g7, and gives you a relatively easy game. After knight d5, knight d5, you threaten to go with the fork. Queen c2, you go knight b6, defending the bishop. When they play rook d2, you rook a2, and after rook b2, bishop b2, bishop b5, you're just absolutely better, and you don't have to worry about position like this. You even threaten bishop a4 in the final position. Instead of d4, they can also go with knight d2. Knight d2 is more or less typical type of plan here. They just open the bishop on g2 and go after the weak pawn on b7. Yes, you can play rook b8 and go queen d7, bishop h3, but you also can go with c6. I'm going to show you the best, and that's the most flexible plan. It's c6, and after bishop b2, you just go with d5. It's from the game from the World Cup between Barev and Svidler. You just go with this one. And anytime they just go with b takes, you play b takes, c takes, you play c takes, and you hold everything. Drawback of this system could be a potentially weak pawn on e5, so you just go with the queen c7 or bringing the knight back to d7 to defend it, even going with f5. That's how Morozevich beat Piquet. For example, he played queen c7, queen b3, knight goes back to d7, harassing the queen with knight c5 at some point, but also giving himself to play some f5 in this situation. So after like bishop a3, you go f5, but you also have knight f5 whenever queen is there, jumping on d4. So when they play e3, rook f to d8, removing from the pin. Those are some flexible ideas. And finally, if knight e2, c6, bishop b2, d5, I very much like this knight f5 move. That's what I missed to do against Bogoslavljevic. I played queen c7 defending on e5, but then he played queen to b3, and he slowly and gradually outplayed me here, and somehow I don't, even though, for example, engines will tell you that black is doing here pretty fine, I would disagree with that, but because from practical point of view, white has a fairly simple game. Sorry. Finally, we just have to check one more move before we check the final move, queen b2, bishop b2. It's queen b3. Queen b3 in all these positions is a very logical thing. Queen b3 gives you control of this diagonal, gives you control of the d5 square at some point. Queen b3 sometimes gives you bishop a3. I'm just trying to explain you like the benefits of the queen on b3. So you go with the battery queen d7, old good battery idea, and they just go with rook to d1. Here, I'm going to show you different kinds of plan where they didn't have to play classic rook e1 to avoid bishop h3. They go with the rook d1 to break with d4. After bishop h3, bishop h1. Here, for the first time in today's lecture, we have a new way of launching the attack by doing the pawn storm. Knight g4. A beautiful move. Now you can see all the benefits for having the h6 because they can play knight g5 to go after the light square bishop. Also, by bringing the knight to g4, not to h5, you can give yourself to push f5. In some even positions, you can go knight f5, but usually you go with f5 and f4, and f2 is going to turn out to be weak. This guy, Donaldson, in this game, played d4, e takes, knight takes, and Anagnostopoulos from Greece went for knight f5. Very much like this one. He's challenging the knight on d4, brought the knight back, and played queen to e6. Very interesting type of position with all these minor pieces into the center. He's pressuring e2 and c4, also having a great open bishop on this diagonal. A file is blacks. Somehow I don't see problems for black. After a3, c6, full flexibility of the game, and he wants to go knight f4, but black played just in time g5. Avoiding knight g5, everything seems to be cool. Bishop d2, rook f to e8. And just take a look at this one. Now, all our pieces are, like simply storming against these two f2 and d3 pawns. After rook e1, when you play g5, you're always opening up g6 square for your queen. It can be a very nice attacking square for the piece, because it sometimes gives you f5, f4, sometimes it gives you queen h5, sometimes it gives you simple control of this diagonal, sometimes you're just moving your queen from the center. After knight e4, e takes d4, Magnus now improves his queen and pressures f2 for the first time and threatens bishop d4 very obviously. Bishop d4, knight d4, queen f2 is mate. Bishop e3, now he's doubling on the file. This guy tried to now exchange a very annoying bishop on h3, but it's too late. Black already had decisive attacking advantage. So after rook d1, knight f6, bringing the knight into the center, avoiding these exchanges, bringing the queen back, and now he's keeping potential of his pieces but not exchanging pieces. And after this, brought this f5 idea, wants to go with f4, d5, c5, bishop c1, f4, cannot take because of queen g4, knight d2, and this guy, after knight f2, realized that he was completely lost and resigned the game. Great game, played like 20 years ago approximately, and shows how should we play if they play this early queen b3. And finally, let's just go into the bishop b2 systems, and here I'm going to show you, and throughout like couple of games that I prepared for you, I'm going to teach you the plans and show you how to play this type of games for black. So after bishop b2, you go queen d7. That's not the only option. I always tell you in my lectures, I give you mostly like alternatives. And here, apart from queen d7, you can also bring your knight back to d7 and go with flexible c6, or a little bit more attacking f5. Although this is more like positional plan. I like attacking plan with the battery bishop e6, queen d7. Keep in mind, pawn has to be on h6 to avoid knight g5, and it's time for us to analyze this position. I just want to tell you one thing. Everyone plays rook e1, but before we go there, those who play c5 here with the idea of b6, because there was an IM from my city who used to play against this mean our blitz games almost all the times. I had problems with the c6 because when I played bishop h3, he used to play b6. His name was Kostic, and he all the time went for this position. Sometimes I use, like I won, sometimes I lose, but I didn't feel like that comfortable in this type of games. And then I realized I'm not supposed to play bishop h3, but on c5 to instantly take control of the center with knight f to d5. That's a crucial thing here, and that's all you have to remember, and you immediately get a little bit better position, even according to these top engines. After knight d5, bishop takes d5. If b6, you just take the pawn and you're up a pawn. If they go c takes, queen d2, rook a2, e4, bishop b3, and I'm showing you game of Gilberto Millos, who outplayed Grandmaster Bishop here. Black had a nice and easy game, and keep in mind, once again, we gotta go with that thing. Once again, turns out that playing bishop h3 is not something that we now want to do, because they committed themselves with e4, locked the light square bishop, made it bad, and on the contrary, we just have like nice control of the a file with these rooks. Queen is somehow standing here, bishop is doing good job here, so don't go with bishop h3, and Grandmaster Gilberto Millos managed to win this fairly easy. Before we go into the main positions, I just want to show you what happens when they play rook a1 and they don't care too much about bishop h3 and the fact that we're about to swap off these bishops. Usually they avoid it because they believe that this way they just weaken the light squares. So let me just show you what's happening here. After like queen to b3, because they can play lots of moves, but in general, when you swap off the light square bishops, we're just going to get like this type of position. I had so many times these positions, and you just have to know one thing. Yes, you can still attack if you know one plan. Attacking this type of the game by jumping with the knight on h5, by bringing your knight back to h7, for example, by moving your king to h7 or h8 in order to push f5 and f4 is not enough. And for example, what I'm explaining right now, I absolutely guarantee that even many GMs and IMs are not familiar with. This position, if you want to equalize, you should be playing c6, d5, and that's it. Of course, before you play d5, make sure to defend the pawn on e5. But if you want to attack, you got to make the following interesting attacking plan. It's g5. And now you would say, okay, are we only threatening and hoping for knight g6? No. Believe it or not, no. And I'll show you what's happening here. If they go with pretty primitive rook a8, rook a8, rook a1, it looks like by exchanging all these pieces, we're getting drawish type of the game, but it's not like that. We go knight g6, and we can go with some queen g4. They can never have any h3 because of knight f4. We can have some knight f4, knight h4 ideas. We can have some interesting possibilities to go, I don't want to say with the attack, but initiative is definitely on the black side. Objectively speaking, it should be around equal. But if someone can push here, that's black, not white. And finally, for example, after g5, I'll show you a game, knight d2. And now you would say, okay, didn't you tell us to play knight g6 now? Well, that could be one plan. But let me just show you another one. And that's what you have to take to be like the main concept and the highlight of this lesson. Learning different kinds of plans and ideas out of this lecture. So it's g4. What a beautiful move. So by playing g4, you're opening up idea for h5 and h4, but more importantly, you would like to bring your knight to h7 and g5. And afterwards, we'll be able to play f5, f4, or maybe some knight f5, jumping with the knight somewhere and doing the kingside attack. In one game, I found rook f to d1, h5, king g1, knight h7, b6, c6, knight d on e4, rook b8, solidifying everything and keeping the pieces on the board, knight f5, hoping and dreaming of knight e4, queen e6, let's just avoid at some point c5, going after the queen, but also I like to maybe bring my queen to g6 and launch the attack, rook a5, h4, knight e7 to be able to play at some point f5, bishop a3, c5. Now you're locking these two pieces and possibility to go with the attack. Now this is hyper solid structure. Breaking with f5, sacking the pawn, and now going with the queen h6. This is what you have to remember about these positions. For example, all the time we've been gradually improving our game by making all these moves, and all of a sudden you sack the central pawn on d6, now you lose the pawn on c5, and your position is looking fantastic. We want to play knight f3, followed by h takes g3 and queen h3, and this should be looking winning. After rook a2, knight f3, king f1, h takes, f4, and take a look at this. Now, you're down 2 pawns, but he's down like proper defense for his king. After g takes, e takes, king e2, g3, you're just going all in, and I'm just showing you this game. Played queen h4, played queen h1, and after f3, rook a8, this guy tried to avoid all these exchanges. You can take a look at this game slower, but then you're just going to realize that this guy absolutely had no defense. Here he's threatening queen g2 followed by bishop g3 with mate. This is an email game played between relatively strong guys, 22 and 2400 in email. It's almost GM strength there, and basically the game was fairly recent, which means that these guys could have used the engines, which means that the quality of this game is pretty high on both sides. And finally, let's just go with the main line. When you play queen d7, they all go bishop rook to e1. An idea of rook e1 is when you play bishop h3 to be able to have a retreating bishop h1 for the bishop. We go with the bishop h3, they go bishop h1. Once again, those who play rook a1, you take and play g5. Not only to go with the knight g6, even though I gave you here an arrow and explained it that that's one idea, but also to go with g5 and h5, g4 and h5. So after g4, knight e2, h5, we want to go with the plans that I showed you in a game between Thurs and Milevsky, the one that I showed you like 2 minutes ago. So after bishop h3, bishop h1, you go knight g4. Now I don't have to explain you why do we go with the knight on g4 and not on h5, because at some point we want to have like a better pressure against the f2 pawn. And here we just have to check what's happening. They don't have too many moves. Those who play d4, watch out, they want to take on e5 and swap off these queens. No, we don't want to play boring. We're just hiding this queen into the center and avoiding swapping the queens off by d takes and queen d7. D takes, knight d5, rook f to d8. Now you're repositioning your pieces not into the attack, but into some sort of action. This is game MacDonald Gallagher, where the guy played queen to b3, took on d5, threatened mate on f2, actually more like to tempo, and after this, he just pinned the queen on b3, these pawns on b5 and d5. After d takes, b takes, he had lots of problems. Gallagher won the pawn. He played knight h4, maybe to open this bishop and to somehow avoid a takes b5 or queen b5. Okay, but then you're just allowing rook d2, and this is how Gallagher managed to win. So that's one thing. Instead of d4, they can, of course, go with the knight d2. I explained you rook a b8. Of course, you can play c6 and d5, but if you're willing to attack, go with the rook on b8. I'm about to show you a beautiful game. A beautiful game where, first of all, we give up on of control of the a file. That's first thing. Second thing, when you play rook a b8, somehow you're preparing yourself for attack. Your attack is going to happen by simple pawn storm and pawn push with f5 and f4. They gotta go queen b3, and according to the engines, now I have to, give you suggestion according to the engines. You should be playing king h7. I usually played king h8, and I'm going to show you in general, in order to create better ideas and creativity for this type of positions, king h8 game. But king h7, say engine, that's quite an interesting thing. Of course, you should move your king, because when the queen goes on b3, it's aimed against f5, and you're weak. Your king could look weak after some c5, c takes, d6. We're not supposed to give them an easy game in the center, because then our attack on the side just weakens. So, king h7, for example, rook a1, f5, rook a7, and then you just go with a plan like f4. I played one game like this, and I will always remember how I fear from f4 plan. I lost that game to a woman, I am Kostic. She played that knight c on e4. At that time, I didn't understand fully these positions. Yes, knight c on e4 should go on right after you play f4, because knight on d2 has to keep an eye on f3. Knight c on e4 controls f2, but I absolutely was unfamiliar with the next move for black. So you shouldn't go and panic if you play f4 and they go knight c on e4, because it looks tremendous for white. But we have this beautiful move, knight f5. That's something I was unfamiliar with. I was, taught by, or I was shown by someone to play always queen f5, queen h5. That's what I did. And what did I do? Nothing. I just satisfied myself because I kind of executed that plan, and then when I brought my queen to h5, I realized there was no mate. No. When you play f4, and you got to be very careful, when are you going to do it? For example, if you remember my game against Gurevich from chess.com, when I reached 2850, I played some e4, threatening some bishop d4, going after the rook and the pawn, and that's how I won. And now, let's go deeper, or let's go back. Do you remember when I told you that the engine says king on h7 instead of king on h8? Maybe because of this. Maybe because you keep an option for e4 and bishop d4 going against both rook on a7 and pawn on a3 and mate it. Because if the king was on h8, you wouldn't have that possibility. Although here, e4 is not that good because of knight d1, and they're just swapping it off, and you can play bishop d4, and if you swap it off, you simply lose the attacking potential. So f4 is very nice. It looks counterintuitive because now they have a beautiful control of the e4 square. They have that famous knight c on e4, and looks like everything is cool. Take a look at the following game. Grandmaster Vasil Spasov, a master for the King's Indian from Bulgaria, played knight f5, wants to go g5 and queen f7, taking advantage of the open f-file. And after knight f3, now this guy threatens to give check and to win the bishop. Or actually, this way he's gonna win the pawn, he's gonna remove our light square bishop, and we won't have any more possibility to attack. So king goes on h8, and after rook a to e1, g5, and after rook 1 to a4, looks like it's one of those positions where you're even very experienced and good English players, for example, older ones who are unfamiliar with these new ideas or new type of attacks by black, can satisfy themselves and say, I have everything. I kept my light square bishop. I'm having two knights around the king. My king is definitely safe. My bishop is doing good on the diagonal where he's got like this. I'm the one who's controlling a file, and queen is on the classic English b3 square. Well, it's complete garbage of thinking, because you're satisfying yourself with a simple, I would say, very superficial look at this position, and you absolutely underestimate black potentials in this game. Believe it or not, black is completely winning. Knight takes f2. You just take on f2. Of course, that if they have the knight, they would take by knight, and this is a little bit crazy. You're sacrificing a piece. He can take by that knight. And not only that, he's about to win this knight. And then you take the pawn. Now you have two pawns for the piece. He takes another piece. Now you have two pawns for two pieces. And you have g4. White is completely lost. Or let me put it a different way. Black is completely winning. You can have fun analyzing this position at home. They're about to absolutely collapse in the next 2 or 3 moves. Black is completely winning. So that's what you have to know. That's what you get feeling of when you analyze these games. For example, over the board, you just get a chess set and analyzing and slowly going into the secrets of these positions. And finally, let me just show you that game with the king h8 that I was about to show you. So after knight e2, I told you to play king h7, but this guy played king h8. But I'm showing you this because of ideas in these positions. f5, f4, and this guy, relatively interesting position, relatively cool game, and he played knight d on e4. If you ask me, this knight d on e4 is, in my opinion, way weaker than knight c on e4. But once again, knight c on e4, you would just play knight f5. He brings the knight here, you play and bring the queen back to d8, threatening some c6, queen b6, controlling the dark squares. Black is great. This guy played knight d on e4, knight f5, knight d5, and looks like his position is just cool. Of course, you can bring the queen back to d8 and have a nice game. You're just moving the queen from some, like 7th rank and hanging by the rook on a7, and you want to break with c6. But instead, this guy Babaev played c6, and after knight b4, take a look at this game. It's crazy interesting, nice, and creative by black. He captured on g3, and he's just opened the f file, brought the queen back to d8, threatening queen b6, and I'm just saying controlling the dark squares. This guy played a3, and looks like he's hyper solid. Looks like we've got nothing. The guy played knight e7, brought the knight back to defend c6 and to break with d5. I insist, how good is this rook on b8 against the queen on b3? It's very important. So they play rook e2 defending on f2. You break in the center by d5. That's a very lovely idea. C takes, and knight goes back to c3. And there we go. The most interesting part of this game happens now. Looks like, once again, black has a solid game, but at some point you just have to go all in with black. Otherwise, if you miss that momentum, you may lose the game. So it's right now. Knight f5, threatening knight g3, followed by rook f1. This guy says, okay, I can't play queen d5 and win the pawn because you're gonna play knight g3. And when I take, checkmate. Okay, keep in mind always this mating pattern. It's gonna be very often here. Rook a1. Now I can't play knight g3 and can no longer give him checkmate because he has this. Yes, maybe that's the case. But now we go knight f2, buddy. I'm weakening your pawns around the king and breaking your structure. Rook f2, queen g5, threatening both of these. This guy captures. Knight g3, threatening some nasty jumps. Bishop g2, rook f2, check. Playing bishop g4. And after this, takes, and play beautiful move knight e4. Playing that because he's going to take with check first. He took with check, took the rook, and won the game. Great game played in Russia between Krasnov and Babayev back to 2007. And finally, rook a1. If rook a1, we always go with the rook on b8 so we can attack and like have a proper defense of the b7 pawn. Once again, I'm reminding you, we're going to check like queen c2 because that's the most common thing in these positions. I'm reminding you, if queen b3, you can put the king on h8 or h7 and go, for example, whatever you do, f5 and f4. Rook a7, f5, knight d2, and go f4. e4 is bad because of that knight d1, and it's going to be exchanged. f4, which was considered to be absolutely terrible for black all these years because they have that knight c on e4, is no longer considered bad because you have that knight f5. So we launch the attack. We're about to open f file. We give up e4 squared, but we get something in return. What's that? That's f5 and knight f5 idea. So after knight f3, go back with the queen on d8, threaten that c6, especially using the advantage of the rook on b8 and queen on b3, threaten c6 followed by here, and at the same time, go with all these ideas. Rook a2, e1, c6. They don't want to give us that. Okay, now I'm having breaking the center by d5. You move the knight. Perfect. Now my queen is going to go on d6, and now I can even go h takes g3, e4, and maybe second g3 with some mates. Knight b7, boom. Now they can't take the queen because you delivered checkmate. They take here, queen f6. And now you're about to sack here, you're about to do something, and you're about to absolutely crush them. You want to play knight f2 followed by something, you want to play knight g3 followed by something else. All things considered, this position is absolutely winning for you. After like queen c2, we just go with f5. And now I just want to show you a lovely game of mine. I always try to find the nice and the very, I would say, cheerful example if it happened to me. I'm also trying to teach you throughout these lectures something that I play, something that I'm not only going to teach you, but I'm giving you clear proof. I'm the one who did it, and it works even on my level. So take a look at this one. The guy played, instead of a3, which is the main move, the guy played like rook a7. And after f4, he played knight e4. I brought my knight to f5. And now looks like knight f to g5 is about to win this one. So take a look at this one. You play h takes, this one, and you play knight f2. This is not my game. I'm just showing you why it doesn't work. Now you defend the bishop on h3, open up the king after h takes, knight takes g3, double sec, and queen g4. You're just opening the king and mate them, because king cannot go here because of mate. In my game was b takes. Sorry, actually it was like this. My opponent played c5, I played d5, he played c6. I played b takes, he played b takes, and I played queen f7. Now I'm having that great attacking potential. I'm kicking his knight away from the center, and most likely my opponent put all his hopes that I was gonna go with queen f7, and that's exactly what I did. He instantly played knight eg5. And looks like he's doing great, because he's attacking my queen, he's about to win my bishop, and I'm about to lose. Well, I saw this, I captured the piece, and that's why you always have to go move deeper in your games. I played knight to e3. Absolutely shocking thing, because I realized that his queen was hanging, so if I take, I'm gonna take, and I'm gonna be completely winning. I apologize. And he captured. And once again, even if he saw this, and I believe he saw this at some point, he absolutely forgot about my next move. And that's the position from the beginning of this lecture. F takes g3. He can't take my queen because I'm delivering beautiful checkmate with two pieces and pawn. And if he doesn't do that, if he, for example, comes up with this, I can have queen f2, but if you sleep your piece in a bullet game, you also won't have problems and say, oh my goodness, I couldn't drop my queen to f2, but I did it to f1. Don't worry, buddy. It's not mate in 1. It's just mate in 2. So it's so nice. It's so lovely. And you just have to remember all these kinds of things. Finally, I found so many games with e3. E3 is considered to be a typical way of fighting against f4. Well, it looks like that. And you play that favorite move of all black players with the g5. The thing about g5 is that you give yourself possibility to bring your queen to g6 and to organize the attack on the king side. You support f4. And in some positions, maybe, I'm saying maybe, because you got to be very careful with the knight d5 ideas by white. Maybe you want to go with the knight on g6. In general, g5 gives you square g6 for the queen, and it gives you better f4 break. I'll show you a game between Vujadinovic IM and Miroslav Markovic. Vujadinovic played bishop g2. This guy captured. Miroslav played rook f7, doubling these rooks, bringing the knight back, playing e4, bringing his knight to g6, and instead of all of you, what would you do? Because you can't play f4, because e4 would be hanging. Now he played a beautiful thing. Played h5 followed by h4. That's how he went after the king on g2 and managed to win very easily. Finally, if after g5, rook a7, I'm showing a game between Hernandez and Zapata. That's a model game for this system. Rook goes usually on a7. It goes after the pawn on b7, but it also weakens the f2 square diagonal g1 a7. Here we can play that a4 and bishop d4 ideas, but here king h8, placing the king in safety, breaking with f4, going after the f2, but giving up e4 square. Any knight c on e4, you take and jump knight f5. You're winning. Any knight d on e4, you just play knight f5. Once again, and bringing that queen to h5 will give you so many nice mating threats. If e takes, g takes, this guy played knight f3 to avoid mates. Of course, knight c on e4, by now you learned that we should be jumping with the knight on f5. Knight f3, you go queen f5. Lovely attacking plan, bringing the queen to h5. This guy played b6, and this is the moment where your calculating skills and creativity has to be shown. So the guy captured, gave up the central pawn, brought the knight c6 with tempo into the center by attacking the rook, took on g3, went knight e4, now got the e3 square for the knight, jumped with the knight and threatened the knight, played bishop g4, and here just did the fork because maybe this guy, Hernandez, believed that he just defended himself, but he forgot about this final touch in the end. Hope that you enjoyed in the presentation that I made here about smashing and killing English opening in the King's Indian Spirit. So many things to learn from this video. It's pretty difficult, I know, but it's also pretty good because you're about to learn so many new things. And once again, I'm saying this video could be applied even for very, very strong players. Thanks for watching and see you next time.